As someone who's mained a Shaman during Cataclysm, I can honestly say the Shaman is absolutely amazing in Mr. Pandaria. All 3 specs. In fact, I can't wait to break all 3 specs down. If you've watched any of the other class videos, you'll know I'm breaking all of the classes down in their own individual playlists, which you'll be able to find on the channel, covering talents, glyphs, spec changes, and eventually a little short sort of starter guide for every spec as well. You'll find a link in the description to the Shaman playlist, which has already got the elemental changes, and I'll be completely honest with you, I do go in quite a bit of detail about talents there as well, so you might be able to skip some of the talent section there and find everything out about the talents that you need to right here. Now, if this is the first MoP video you're actually looking at, you might not be aware that the talents change from how they are in Cataclysm, where you pick one every other level. So now, every 15 levels, you choose between one of 3 very powerful talents, all the way up to level 90. Firstly, at level 15 are your survival talents. Now, you're going to have Nature's Guardian, which is currently a talent in Cataclysm, where whenever a damaging attack brings you below 30% health, your maximum health is increased by 25% for 10 seconds, and your threat level towards the attacker is reduced. Now, this effect can't occur more than once every 30 seconds, and it's not really as good as either of the other talents. Secondly would be Stone Bulwark Totem, which on a 1-minute cooldown places a totem down for 30 seconds that grants the caster a shield, absorbing X amount of damage for 10 seconds, and then additional damage every 5 seconds thereafter for the full 30 seconds, or as long as the totem lasts. As in, if it's not actually destroyed by someone. Now, because you get that upfront pretty big absorb, but then smaller absorbs over the rest of the duration, this actually is a really, really strong option. However, for a flat damage reduction, Astral Shift is amazing. So it's on a 1.5-minute cooldown, and it basically just gives you a 40% damage reduction for 6 seconds. Now, Elemental and Enhancement are not short on damage reduction cooldowns because they both get Shamanistic Rage on a 1-minute cooldown, which reduces damage taken by 30%. Having a second one certainly doesn't hurt. For your level 30 talents, it's all about control and CC. Firstly, you get Frozen Power, where when you Frost Shock, it also roots the target in ice for 5 seconds, which an amazing PvP option, and I'll be honest with you, all 3 of these are amazing PvP options. Secondly, you got Earth Grab Totem, which is basically a mass Earthbind totem. The totem pulses every 2 seconds, and anyone around within 10 yards of the totem will get rooted for 5 seconds. If an enemy has already been rooted once, then the totem instead will slow them by 50%. So basically, after the root, it's then working as a standard Earthbind totem anyway. It's on a 30-second cooldown, but incredibly strong, not just in PvP, but really useful in PvE as well. And then finally, Windwalk Totem, which is on a 1-minute cooldown, and all it does basically is within 40 yards of the totem, it grants all party and raid members immunity to movement impairing effects. Like you can see, optionally, you can use any of these. It just depends on what you're doing at the time, whether it's PvP, whether it's PvE, if you're against a melee team even in PvP where you want to be able to Frost Shock to root. It just comes down to what you're doing on what you would actually choose here. At level 45, it's all about your totems. So first of all, you get Call of the Elements, which is a 3-minute cooldown, and when activated, it immediately finishes the cooldown of all totems with a base cooldown shorter than 3 minutes. Now, the last part of that is incredibly important because all of your big totems, like Stormlash Totem, which is a 5-minute cooldown, Spirit Link Totem, which it is a 3-minute cooldown, and obviously, like it reads, the totem has to have a base cooldown shorter than 3 minutes. So it's not actually going to reset any of your big totems, but things like Capacitor Totem, which is a new totem, which is an AoE stun, that's only a 45-second cooldown. That would be reset, as would something like Healing Stream Totem, which is on a 30-second cooldown. So it's useful, but it don't mean that you're going to get like double Stormlash Totems or double Healing Tide Totems. It's more the lesser totems that you could use again. Totemic Persistence just means summoning a second totem of the same element no longer causes the first totem to be destroyed. Now, it's important that this doesn't work with fire totems. So you wouldn't be able to have a Searing Totem down with a Fire Elemental Totem, for example. The places where this would be useful is if you've got a Healing Stream Totem down, and then you need to use Healing Tide Totem. It's not going to destroy the Healing Stream Totem, because that's quite important when it's on a 30-second cooldown anyway, but it just means you're getting the benefit of both. And then Totemic Projection, which is the one that I use the most, because it's only on a 10-second cooldown, and it relocates your active totems to a specified location. Now, the reason this is super strong for absolutely every spec, because if you use something like the Capacitor Totem, which is your AoE stun, you can move it into the mobs rather than you having to move into melee range to drop the totem in the first place. Honestly, 90% of the time I'm running Totemic Projection, and Not exclusively for Capacitor Totem, but it's definitely a big reason why. At level 60, you're going to get a DPS talent, or a Healing Throughput talent. But first of all, Elemental Mastery, which will be nothing new to you if you've played Shaman at all, ever, because it basically gives you a 30% haste buff for 20 seconds. Now, if you use this currently in Cataclysm, you get damage from it as well. Well, no more. It's basically just like a mini Bloodlust for 20 seconds, but only for you. Next up, you've got Ancestral Swiftness, which is a 1.5 minute cooldown, and it just makes your next spell, as long as it's got a base cast less than 10 seconds, to become instant. And that'll be nothing new to you either, but the passive it gives probably will be, because this increases spell haste by 5%, or melee haste by 10%. So using this talent, the instant cast bit is nice, don't get me wrong, but really you'd be using it if you want the 5% spell haste, or the 10% melee haste. However, I think most people are going to use Echo of Elements just because of how bloody strong it is. What this does is when one of your spells causes direct damage or healing, you have a chance to gain Echo of the Elements, duplicating the spell's effect. That's it. But it's just that good. This on top of, let's say, as Elemental, when you're getting Overload procs, this also procs independently of that, and if you're doing a big heal, you've got a chance of doubling it. I mean, it's just an amazing talent, and honestly, I would use this for all 3 specs almost 100% of the time. Next up for the level 75 talents, it's a bit of a healing / support. So firstly, you got Rushing Streams. This just allows your healing stream totem to heal 2 targets at once and for an additional 15% healing. Just for passive healing at all times, this is really nice. It's really going to get trumped by the next talent we talk about, which is Ancestral Guidance. Ancestral Guidance is a super strong cooldown that should be allocated to certain key parts of the fight where big damage is going to go out, because it does really help. But what it does is when you deal direct damage or healing for the next 10 seconds, 40% of the damage or 60% of the healing is copied as healing to up to 3 nearby injured party or raid members. Now that doesn't sound like a lot. If you've got a Resto Shaman using it, maybe you've got an Ellie Shaman in the group as well. If you're doing 25 man, you might even have an Enhancement Shaman or 2 in there as well, because Enhancement's really strong in the first phase. If you've got all of your Shamans syncing this up, that is a lot of healing going out across that 10 seconds. You could stagger it as well and just use one at each different time, but again, it's just a super strong talent, and make sure you use it really well, Shamans. And then finally, Conductivity, which is definitely just a resto talent. I don't see any other situation where Enhancement or Elemental would even contemplate taking this. But when you cast Healing Wave, Greater Healing Wave, Healing Surge, or Chain Heal, your healing range duration is increased by 3.5 seconds. And then basically, with all of your DPS abilities as well, including melee abilities like Storm Strike, that also increases it by 3.5 seconds. This basically just means your healing range will last 40 seconds in total. So for Resto, this is amazing. If you don't need Ancestral Guidance, because there's not that period of time where you need extra healing basically for free going out, then using this as Resto and only having to put down healing range once every 40 seconds is huge. For anyone else, if you're Enhancement or Ellie, there'll be the odd fight maybe where your healers ask you to help out and put a healing range down. It's not something you're going to very often use, and you certainly wouldn't talent it. And then finally, the big boy level 90 talents, which, I'll be honest with you, can seem a little bit underwhelming at first. You've got Unleash Fury. This just empowers your Unleash elements. Now, depending on what weapon imbue you're using, depends on what this actually does. And it's definitely stronger for some specs than others, but if you're using Flame Tongue, for example, it's going to increase the damage that the enemy takes for 10 seconds, and it'll be 30% from your Lightning Bolt and 10% from your Lava Burst. For Wind Fury weapon, for 8 seconds after using it, your melee auto-attack can trigger Static Shock, which if you're not aware because you don't play Enhancement very much, Static Shock is just when you have a chance when you're using Storm Strike or Lava Lash to deal damage equal to one of your lightning orbs. If you're using Earth Living weapon, it increases the effectiveness of your next single target heal on the target by 50%. Frostbrand causes you to get a 50% movement speed for 4 seconds, and Rockbiter weapon is another defensive cooldown where you take 40% reduced damage from the enemy target for 5 seconds. Now throughout the expansion, this is going to blow hot and cold, whether it's good or bad, but mainly for Enhancement. At lower gear levels, it's not great. Once you start getting some decent gear in the first phase, it will be great. Same with Throne of Thunder, and then eventually it does get outscaled by other talents that we'll talk about in a minute. And quite honestly, for the other 2 specs, I would just never use it at all. The only real spec that will get a decent benefit from this is once you start getting some gear on an Enhancement Shaman in the first, second, third phase. The other option early on, which people will probably tell you to use, will be Elemental Blast, but me personally, even in early levels of gear as Enhancement, I do prefer Unleashed Fury just because it just feels a lot less clunky than using Elemental Blast. But what is Elemental Blast? It's on a 12-second cooldown, and it just does really big direct damage, and it is really big, and also can proc things like Echo of Elements, don't forget. And 8 seconds after using it, you're going to get either 3.5k, crit, haste, or mastery. So a really, really big load of secondary stats. Not all three, just one of the three. Now for Elemental, this feels great because it does hit hard and it benefits from your mastery. So it can overload, so it will hit a second time for reduced damage. For both other specs, I think it's kind of neither here nor there, to be fair. But I love it as Elemental, and I pretty much class it exclusively as an Elemental talent, even though, like I said, Enhancement can make good use of it as well. And then finally, Primal Elementalist. Before I even get into it, this is a bit of a weird one. And I say it's a weird one because the actual big use effect from it is something that outside of Resto, you're rarely going to actually make use of. But what it basically does is changes your normal elementals into primal elementals. They're 80% more powerful than the regular ones, and they act as pets directly under your control. Now, they also gain additional abilities, but the biggest thing is that you actually get a pet bar, so they're really nice to use. You can control the pet and make it attack what you want, rather than, like if you're a shaman in Cataclysm, your fire ellie will just run wherever it feels like, even though it's meant to follow the last target that got flame shocked. Now, the new abilities they gain is if you use an earth ellie, you're going to get reinforce, and if you use a fire ellie, you're going to get empower. When you use these abilities, they channel it on you, so your pet is just stood there now channeling, it's not attacking. This is why you won't use it that much as a DPS, because they actually do a lot of damage. They're going to outweigh the extra 5% damage that you're going to get from, let's say, empower from a fire ellie, where it's only giving you 5% damage buff. That will do more than that 5% damage that it's giving you. So really, as a DPS spec, you're using this purely just for the extra damage that the elemental's going to do, not for the extra abilities that they gain, namely Reinforce and Empower. Reinforce is really good though, because it's a 20% damage reduction while it's being channeled on you, and it increases your healing done by 10%. That's why when you look at these three talents, it's kind of not negotiable. As a Resto Shaman, you're always going to use Primal Elementalist, because you just literally get it out. It's not about the amount of damage it does. You just get the pet out and you get it channeling on you. So you're going to do 10% more healing, and if you've got the Reinforce buff, you're actually taking less damage as well. So it's really, really strong as Resto. As Ellie and an Enhancement, it's kind of a nice addition. You can use it. I think Enhancement really should be leaning more towards Unleashed Fury for the majority of the time, until Primal Elementalist actually later on in the expansion will really take over from Unleashed Fury. And for Elemental, just use Elemental Blast. Now, don't get me wrong, as we get really reliable sims closer to MoP launching, or when we're all in the beta and the sims are being updated, then some of this might change, but that's kind of my fieldcraft, if you like, or things that I've experienced personally on my Shaman on private servers. So take it with a pinch of salt, but it's worked well for me. And that's the Shaman Talents. I'll put a link to the playlist in the description. Be sure to check back regularly, because I will be getting through all of these classes and spec videos and changes and talents and glyphs and all of that over the next couple of months, trying to get a video out every single day, as you've probably noticed. So be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.